Hi there, my name's Gordon and I'm reading from the book The End is Nigh Again, but this time we really mean it. I'm reading a portion from a chapter about blood and the attitude of Jehovah's Witnesses to blood, and particularly the attitude of my father to blood. Okay, so this was when we were children. This will be in two parts, by the way, so follow along. One evening when I was around 8 years old, I took part in a conversation that would leave its mark on me, rather like a pair of initials carved into a tree trunk. I recall perfectly how the whole family was seated around the communal dining table, reluctantly sharing in what Dad liked to call a nice spiritual conversation. We children called them lectures, but not to his face, of course. The theme of our supposedly upbuilding chat revolved around an article that the Society had published in their monthly magazine, The Awake. It addressed one of the most polemic and critically viewed areas of the witness faith, namely our refusal to accept blood transfusions and other blood-related products. That evening we listened to Dad as he revelled in the opportunity of condemning the world and its evil, dirty practices. Whilst waxing ineloquently about the unnecessary use of blood and its dreadful side effects, he slipped in his favourite biblical quote about how disgusting in their filth they all were. During that particular evening meal around the dinner table, we delved deeply into the ethics of the blood issue, and after what had been until then a one-way discussion, Angus, looking uncharacteristically pensive, suddenly blurted out a question that left everyone quite literally frozen in the moment. "What would happen then," he said, waving a forkful of mince and mash in front of his young yet far from innocent face, "if one of us had an accident and lost a lot of blood?" There followed a moment of silence as Angus stared intently at Dad and waited for his answer. Naturally, Veronica and I followed suit, watching him intently as he searched for an answer to what must have been an excruciatingly uncomfortable question. I noticed with irony that this was one of the few times Dad had our full attention without holding a potential weapon in his hand. After all, we were talking about our very lives here, and that merited our absolute concentration. Dad cleared his throat, as he always did before making one of his famous and lengthy sermons, and began to paint the horrific picture of what could lie ahead for us, were we to be critically injured. "That decision," he said hoarsely, "would be the hardest one I'd ever have to make in my life. Yet I know that Jehovah would give me the strength to do the right thing." There was yet another pause, whilst he worked out how to appropriately structure the next part of his answer. We three just continued to stare up at him with 6 saucer-like eyes, whilst we waited for the reply from the man we had always assumed was there to protect us. "Of course, I'd have to refuse the blood transfusion for any of yous. I could never allow that to happen if I'm to keep a clear conscience with Jehovah." And so that was that. And there we had it, as clear as a recently polished window overlooking hell. "And so you would say no, even if it meant that we would die, Dad?" I asked, feeling a little dizzy from the images forming in my mind of my own lifeless body laid out on a white-sheeted hospital bed. "That's just it, son," he said with what in fairness was genuine sadness. "Even if I did save you by allowing them to give you blood, we would be breaking God's law, and that would mean we would never get into paradise earth and have the chance of living forever." Although I was just about managing to follow the deeply unsound logic of this reasoning, I was aware that the whole subject of my death was making me feel very uneasy. "Think about it this way," he said, anxiously trying to positively reframe the whole scenario. "What would you rather have, Douglas?" he asked me. "A life now that only lasts 70 years and 10, or life eternal here on a paradise earth, living under God's perfect rule. Wow, some choice for an 8-year-old, I thought. The reality was that I wanted neither in isolation. In my opinion, one was nothing without the other. I wanted to have my cake, and I wanted to eat it too. And whilst we were on the subject, as far as I was concerned, death just wasn't on the agenda. The idea of having to make a trade-off between my everlasting life at some unfixed point in the future and my own precious, dear, wonderful life now was putting the collywobbles right up me. As an interesting sideline, a recent survey was made in which the cognitive thinking processes of small children was studied. The purpose was to ascertain whether the children were going to be successful in the future, not only professionally, but within the social arena too. The test was simplicity itself, and involved asking each children one straightforward question. What would you rather have? 1 biscuit now, or 2 biscuits later? Apparently, the 2 biscuits later children were going to have tremendous success in life, and were the ones that would have the foresight and the perspicacity to plan ahead, happy to wait for a later yet better reward. These children would be the great investors, the ones who would reach retirement with a tidy little nest egg which they would then use to lavish presents on their grandchildren, spoiling them horrendously, much to the disgust of the parents who never had anything like that when they were young. On the other hand, the children that wanted their biscuit right away were the ones who had little hope of enjoying a life of luxury and splendour. These would be impetuous people who would spend everything they had, get into debt, and end their days impoverished and reliant on state pensions. Having had to make a very similar choice as those children, only this time with my own life, I know for sure that those investigators missed the mark by miles. Their failure was in making certain assumptions about why a child might want a biscuit now and not later. The first and most important variable is that of trust. After all, the people who performed the test were investigators, and we all know how weird they can be sometimes. And so, what if the children just didn't trust that the strangers would come good on their promise of 2 biscuits later? Perhaps by choosing the "I'll have one now, thank you very much" option, the children showed themselves to be shrewd, businesslike people, striking while the iron was hot and taking what they could. These might be the very ones ending up with a high-powered job in the stock exchange. Perhaps the children that chose the 2 biscuit option would become overly trusting and be the ones who would end up wandering off with strangers on the dubious promise of some sweeties later. Moreover, the 2 biscuit children could well spend their whole life listening to a host of unfulfilled promises that would, without doubt, be made up by those of the 1 biscuit group, such as, "I'm actually writing your cheque as we speak. Of course, you're the only one, darling. It's okay, I've had a vasectomy. I'm a Nigerian businessman, and if you give me your bank details, I'll deposit £20 million into your account. Congratulations, you've won a large monetary sum on this free handed to you in the street scratch card. Someone will now take you on a 20-minute journey out of town so you can pick up your astounding winnings. P.S. Have you ever thought of investing in a timeshare?" All things considered, as I thought of Dad's question and wondered whether I preferred my life now or the one in the future, I made up my mind to go for the 1 biscuit option. After all, I thought, what if the Paradise Earth didn't happen, and in the end I had to sacrifice my life for nothing? What if by some bizarre miracle I got into paradise, only to discover that it was bloody awful? What if God was still suffering from residual post-traumatic stress disorder because of the fiasco in the Garden of Eden, and once he had us nicely established on his Paradise Earth, he suddenly became despotic again? Okay, I'll continue this in the next video. Watch on.